Hello, I'm Dan Curry from the Deeds of God website, and this is a continuation of the 6-day series which discusses how the human body seems to be made with holy images in it and on it, and which I believe, though subjective, could be true, and which is not specified by the Bible but possibly supported by it in such statements as we are fearfully and wonderfully made in the image of God, our body is a temple, etc. Today I want to discuss how Jesus is, as Christians believe, the Son of God, and He died for man, and His shed blood was the once and final necessary atonement. The Jewish people in the ancient days of the Bible were God's people, and each year atonement was made for the sins of the people by the high priest, who went into a room called the Holy of Holies, first in their tabernacle, later in their temple, and he would put some goat's blood and some bull's blood in a ceremony that they had in a dish that was on the top lid of a wooden box called the Ark of the Covenant. It was overlaid with gold. God had prohibited the making of images, but in this case, He specified that 2 creatures be made on the lid. I do not believe that anybody today knows exactly what they looked like. You can find lots of pictures of these cherubim. They're winged creatures. They were to be on the top of the lid at the ends, facing the center. They were to have their wings touch. I do not know if they were to have both wings touching, or one wing in front of them covering themselves while the other wing touched. But it won't matter for this demonstration. And the truth is, when I read the words in the Bible's description of it, I can't tell for certain which one it was. I think probably it was both wings, even though in another case of winged creatures around the throne of God, they covered themselves with the wings they weren't using to hover. So I'm not sure. But here's a possible easy line drawing of the top of the Ark of the Covenant. Well, what I tried to draw was the lid, kneeling figures with their wings bent across the front of them, their leaning heads, and I just drew a dark area where their faces would be if this is like a hood or their hair. And they're apparently partially feathered creatures, and here's their wings arching over to touch. Well, right here is a dish. I just drew it as a dark place, and that's where the blood would be dripped. We Christians believe that when Jesus died, this sacrifice of animals was no longer necessary. Our scriptures say that is true. And that Jesus' shed blood when He was on the cross is the once and final atonement for all men of any race, anywhere in the world, throughout all the time that's been passing by since 2,000 years ago when He was crucified. It's all that's needed for any man's sins to be atoned for if we will repent of our sins, turn to Christ and follow Him, be baptized in His name, and then go tell others, which is one of our main jobs as Christians. Well, here's just an easy semblance, almost like a cartoon, or I shouldn't say cartoon so much as just a line drawing of Christ on the cross. It's supposed to be a pool of blood, a hill of dirt like where the cross is buried. That's supposed to look like a lip as well, because I believe this is on our face, but that's just my belief. So lower lip looking thing, pool of blood. Upper lip looking thing, dirt where the cross was buried, like when you bury a post hole. The philtrum right here, this little line going up, the rest of the cross, the knees of Jesus sticking out towards us, and His calf muscles kind of like nostrils, and His body, and then His arms, and then His bowed head, like maybe with the thorn crown on still. I'm not sure if He had the thorn crown on the cross. And then 3 lines of writing above Him, which is what Pontius Pilate placed on a sign that he had placed above Jesus. And Pontius Pilate was the governor, the Roman governor of the area, who had he was the only one around with the authority to inflict capital punishment on a criminal or a prisoner, but the Jewish people at the time, some of them wanted Jesus crucified, and they had to go to Pontius Pilate to achieve that. And then, barely seen 2 little lines going up right above the, quote, head of Jesus, and that's the continuation of the cross up into the sign. So, here's 2 creatures, and here's where atonement blood went. Here's a line drawing of the provider of what we Christians think is the once and final atonement. So, I'm saying to you that if you take something like this, and you shift and place it right here so that this blood from the pool pours out into the mercy seat, so it's like bottom of the cross, arms of Jesus, 3 lines of writing. If if you just shift that over and stick it into there, it'll look something like this. So these are the legs, head of the two cherubim, wings of the cherubim. But inside is the arms of Jesus, the head of Jesus, the three lines of writing, the trunk of his body, his knees sticking out towards us, his calf muscles, the rest of the cross, the hill of dirt, possibly bloody, pool of blood. You know how lips are red. Well, at any rate, I just think it happens to form a figure that looks like a human face. Now, humans are not the center point of history. We're only a created being, and we're not holy. We're sinful. We fell far short of the mark, but the design that went into us is celestial, but far above celestial. It's from God himself. Our design is brilliant. Here in the center of this space, just like in the center of all of history, you can place a Jesus and it fits, and it does the job of completing a human in a way, so to speak, the image of a human, as if a human was built to showcase Jesus. And I think we were, even though we're so sinful. We should not be worshipped in any way whatsoever, but we're a creation, and God's a heck of a creator. So if this is the heads of these creatures, this is showing the wing covering the body, and they're in a kneeling position. And here's the wings both being up, with both pairs of wings arching over, and the head leaning forward, and then Jesus drawn in just like before. That's kind of a quick version of how the Ark of the Covenant, which received the Holy Atonement blood once a year back then, that's just a picture of how it would look if you sort of how it would look, based on my imaginings of what I read, how it would look if you did place a crucified Christ there. And I think that Christ was meant from the beginning of time to have to be our atonement. I personally think a lot of history is to show us that we're incapable of governing ourselves. Anyway, moving on. Here's just another drawing of the same thing, but I wanted to include that not only does our face seem to show Jesus, but if you kind of draw the rest of the Ark of the Covenant, I didn't throw in every detail it describes. There was a 3-inch margin around here that was it was probably pretty. It's very beautiful. All these things were covered over with sheets of gold. But here's the Ark, and I sort of made it like you could see into it, which you couldn't. But it had the 2 plates of the law inside of it. You can go to Hebrews and find this out. The Old Testament talks about like one thing, just the place of the law being in it, but the book of Hebrews in the New Testament speaks of 3 things that were in there. The 2 plates of the law that Moses didn't break. I drew them down here more technically perfect, I suppose. We don't know what they look like. And a tipped jar I drew here. Well, there's a jar of manna in there, a gold jar, and it's supposed to show future generations someday what manna was like. So it says that there was plates of the law and manna, and Aaron's budded staff. Aaron was the brother of Moses, the first high priest. He was challenged once by other tribe leaders of the Israelites, saying, shouldn't we get a chance to be the high priest? Moses told them, it's from God that Aaron's the high priest. I can't pick you. You're not supposed to be taking turns. They were still angry about it, so God said, okay, tribe leaders, bring up your staffs. And I drew little short staffs like Egyptians had, because the staff is said to fit in this, and this is only like 40 something inches long. So it can't be a giant staff like a shepherd had. It just wouldn't fit. So I drew a short one like Egyptians had. I wanted to show how this staff of Aaron's, and Aaron was the speaker. That was what he was good at, is speaking. That Moses needed somebody better at speaking than him, he told God. God said, well, your brother Aaron. That's how they started out working together. And if you look at our oropharyngeal passage going down to our lungs and then branching off all over, well, when they had this contest, everybody laid their staffs overnight against a holy temple item inside the temple, or I should say the tabernacle. And in the morning when they came back, everybody else's staff still looked the same, but Aaron's had grown leaves and grown roots and grown almonds all overnight, a sign that he was the chosen high priest. Well, just to keep hitting on how we're building images, or you can at least interpret that we might be, the passage of our airway that we use for speaking, and remember Aaron was the speaker, actually does branch off and actually could resemble some sort of a short shepherd's staff with the crook and everything. The crook, the curve. So if you draw the same thing as before, with Christ crucified pouring out blood into the mercy seat, it almost looks like when some men grow that little thing beneath their lip into their chin beard. But whatever the case, it kind of has the image of a man. And if you draw it on top of the ark, and you kind of show the contents of the ark that are described in the Bible, you do see plates of the law. A tipped jar, like an amphora jar, is a little bit similar to how our heart is tipped, and these are kind of like our lungs. And I guess, in truth, these carrying rings are almost where nipples would be, as if to keep suggesting that it's a chest, But poles were passed through these, and that's how it was carried. Now remember, it never did have Jesus in it. The Ark of the Covenant never did have Jesus carved into it, only these creatures, and I don't know what they look like. But I do believe that man seems to have been made in the image of God in many other ways, and this thought just came to me once when I was considering it. Purely speculative, but thank you for listening to this film segment of the Deeds of God 6-Day series.